Here we go, ladies and gentlemen. Where to start? Rob Simpson with you, along with the legendary in his realm, longtime scribe around Hockey Town and environs and across the river, Bob Duff. Duffer, how the hell are you?
Oh, getting ready for another year of compelling, exciting Red Wings hockey. Can we? Can they avoid going double digits in a row without making the playoffs?
Imagine 25 years in the playoffs and now looking at potentially 10
25 years
out.
out.
And you know what? I hate to say it, liking their chances.
Oh, this is not going to be a joyous 100th anniversary celebration, I don't think, because there's not going to be much to celebrate this year.
I don't even know where to start. I'm looking at some of the people on this roster. I don't want to call them retreads. It's a little bit disrespectful, but there are guys that are just seem to be plug and play. And apparently, lately, those veteran plug and plays have gained the ire of, or earned the ire, whatever it is, of the head coach. Mr. McLelland's not too happy with things.
Yeah, they've looked more like plugs than players.
Right.
And he went off on them today and just said, like, he didn't say the word sense of entitlement, but he hinted at it. Just like he said that they have to be aware of their standing in the game, and maybe at one time you were a 1A or a 1B. He said, but you need to look at your surroundings and figure out where you are on your journey of your career, because they played a very, very listless game on home ice last night and lost 2-1 to the Penguins, and 2-1 flattered them. Like, they had no right to be close. They just were beaten in every aspect of the game, and John Gibson played pretty well in net and kept the score close. But the veterans who played last night, for the most part, did not shine, and that was what had Mr. McLelland a little bit upset this morning. He apparently had words with them individually before practice to just kind of let them know that he's not impressed, and he basically threw down the gauntlet to the guys that are playing in Chicago tonight that this might be your last chance to show me something.
Wow. Do any veteran players come to the top? Come to
Well,
the
he
top
didn't
of your
get into
mind?
specifics. I mean, what was interesting, he talked about the defense, and he said, Sider, Sherratt, and Edvinsson are fine. And then he added Albert Johan. None of them are playing tonight because, basically they've made the team.
Yeah.
And he said Albert Johansson's playing tonight, but he's been fine. He's made the team.
Yeah.
After that, it's the other four veterans, the two that are back, Justin Holl and Eric Gustafsson, and then the two newcomers that he brought in, or that Steve Yzerman brought in as free agents, Jacob Bernard Docker and Travis Hamonic, that McLelland doesn't seem to be enamored with at the moment.
Hamonic's 35. He had some serious knee issues when he was out here in Vancouver, and I guess he would fit into that category that I'm talking about. How's up front? How's James Van Riemsdyk been?
He hasn't been here.
Because he's
He's
hurt.
supposed to, or no, his wife apparently is having a baby or something. They said at the start of camp he'd been given permission not to come, but they said it was going to be a happy situation. But we've kind of heard through the grapevine that his wife was having a baby, and there's rumors that they had twins. But he's been gone for at least 2 weeks now. I get that you want to be with your family at a time like this, but you or I wouldn't get 2 weeks off work to
No.
just because our wives had a baby. So the fact that almost a lot of the fan base is kind of upset about it because they feel like he should be here. And Yzerman set out to get three things in the summer. His wish list was a number one goalie, a top four defenseman, and a top six forward. He got one. If he played for the Tigers, he had a good year. He was hit 333, but he didn't have a good year, and you can't put the blame on him 100%. They wanted Gavrikov, who decided instantly he was going to the Rangers, so they never got a shot at him. They were interested in Ekblad, who stayed in Florida. And up front, they wanted to talk to Nikolai Ehlers, and he wouldn't take their calls. So Steve says that I asked him flat out, do guys want to come and play here? When you're trying to get free agents, do you have any? And he said initially when he came here, he would have said no, but he said he thought now everything was fine, but evidently it wasn't, because some high-end guys they were interested in didn't even return their calls.
Wow. Is there any thought regarding the Hughes boys, because they're Michiganders, and that, grew up around Ann Arbor, grew up wherever, and of course Quinn's contracts, he's got 2 left. Luke's in a little impasse right now in New Jersey. Is there any of that like fantasy talk about, maybe someday we'll get the Hughes boys here?
Never heard any rumblings about Luke, but certainly Quinn. There has been speculation that make up for their grievous error at the 2018 draft when he was sitting there and they took Philip Zadina. And I've heard through the team sources that even if they hadn't taken Zadina, they still wouldn't have taken Hughes. They probably would have taken either Dobson or Bouchard.
Yeah.
They certainly tried to get Dobson this summer, but the problem Yzerman has is nobody wants his players. It's not like he's not trying to make moves, but when you've got, other than to give away, he's not giving away Mo Seider or Lucas Raymond. And, I think if they could get Quinn Hughes, they would give up Axel Sandin-Pellikka. It's probably their best defensive prospect right now. He's kind of a similar player to Hughes, smallish, high-end skill, a little questionable defensively.
Right.
So, I would think if you're Vancouver and you were making that trade, you'd want him back. So you kind of have your potential replacement for Quinn Hughes.
By the way, just so you know, I've written about the Zadina pick and Hughes being next, and the alternatives behind them, like Dobson. Any of them would have been great. Imagine them paired with, Seider, especially freaking Hughes. But anyway, and he was playing at the University of Michigan. So after writing about it numerous times and talking about it, I was sitting in the Seattle media room, and Kenny was there. He was last year with Edmonton, and I just said, "Dude, like, what happened? How did this get screwed up?" And he took me through the story, and then eventually took responsibility for making that final call on a winger from the Quebec League, as opposed to a guy that would probably be a top 4 defenseman in Hughes's case. Beyond that, forever. So anyway, that was that.
And they desperately needed a defenseman then too.
Oh,
Which is the other, because there were so many good defensemen available in that draft. I wrote leading into the draft, there's no way they don't take a defenseman, because there's too many good ones and they need one.
Yeah.
And I was always told that it was Tyler Wright, who was their head scout then, who just, when Zadina started dropping, who just was having conniptions. Oh my God, he's going to fall to us. We're going to get him.
Wow. Well, anyway, Kenny, I appreciate Kenny taking the responsibility for that move, because
ultimately, the first round pick is the GM's call. Like, he could have said, "No, we're taking this guy."
Yeah.
Like, Steve's the same way. Steve always takes responsibility for the first round pick. He admits that he doesn't know as much about the guys beyond that, but it's the GM's job to know who the first round pick is.
Yeah. What did we think of the last couple of drafts? 2-3 drafts. Like, is there scoring?
I think he's drafted fine. I think Steve's done a great job at the draft table. You look at the 2019 draft, his first draft, they're going to have 3 guys on the team this year from that draft, and Johansson, Seider, and Elmer Soderblom.
Yeah.
So, that's a pretty good start. And then, 2020, the guy that they're kind of waiting on right now is William Wallinder. He'll probably start the year in Grand Rapids, but if they struggle on defense and these veterans continue to disappoint, I would be surprised to see him come up. He's not going to be a star. He's probably going to be between a 3 and a 6 and be more of a PK guy than a point producer. But he looks like he can play in the NHL. And, that's what you want when you get a draft. You're not going to get 20 superstars in a draft. If you can get 3 NHL players out of the draft, you've done pretty well.
Yeah.
And then they've got the jury's still out on Kosa. I don't know if he's gonna be eventually a number one goalie. But everybody I talk to, every scout says Trey Augustine's the real deal. The guy is still at Michigan State. The only worry with that is instead of coming out this year, he stayed at Michigan State for his junior year. Now, the story is he wants to win the national championship, which is the only thing he hasn't done there. But you have to worry because, he'd be a year away from being a senior and potentially becoming a UFA. So if they don't sign him this summer, then I'd start to be worried if I was a Wings fan. And the guy who's been interesting in camp, they signed this Czech goalie, Michael Postava, who won the Czech League title last year at the age of 23 in his first year in the Czech League. And he's played 2 preseason games and looked pretty good. And he looked pretty good in camp too. So, it's almost like he's the insurance policy in case Kosa doesn't work out. And then Augustine does decide to, hey, I can become a UFA and make a fortune.
Wow.
So who knows? So, goaltending is kind of like pitching. You can never have too many.
Right.
And, when you look back to when Steve got here, they had none. And they've gone through, one journeyman goalie after another. That's kind of the one encouraging thing I think out of the summer is that they got John Gibson. So now you've got a guy at least who's a legit number one NHL goalie, which they really haven't had in about a decade.
Yep. I know Gibby a little bit, and I'm glad he got a fresh start or a change of scenery because he was just taking a beating in Anaheim for so long. The shot totals are absurd. I was an UFO with him when he won the World Junior Gold in Russia in 2013. It was ice in his veins. So he still has it. But he's, of course, getting up there in age.
The worrisome thing with him is how many games can he play at his age? I think Cam Talbot's 38, so he hasn't looked great in camp.
Right.
But he didn't look great in camp last year either. And then when the real game started, he was like a different player.
Well, so, hopefully,
if they can get 30 games out of him and 52 out of Gibson, I think that would be the ideal scenario.
Well, as long as these guys in the pipeline start to show up, then they can ride.
Well, that's the thing now because they don't have a veteran guy beyond those two anymore. They always had a third guy in recent years. So if either of those guys goes down, then Kosa's your guy. He's going to have to play.
Right.
So we may find out very quickly if he's ready for the NHL.
By the way, your grandkids are having a wild time today.
I can hear that, eh? Yeah, that's pretty much standard operating procedure in this house every day.
I got to give a shout out to Dave Regnick, whose name I've mispronounced 70 different ways over the last 25 years, but he sent me this lid. Thank you very much, David. Tiger Baseball. And wear my Mackinac shirt. Gordy, or should I say Gordy, he's always there. So we keep number 9 around the house. When does the heat really start? I mean, you've got, the golden boy, Stevie Wonder, Stevie Y running this thing. When does it start to be like, okay, then?
Well, I'm always reminded of the old famous saying, Gord Stellick. I said one time, somebody asked him, when do you know that it's time to change the coach? And he said, before they figure out it's your fault. Being GM. So Steve's changed the coach twice now. So I don't know if you get a third chance at it. I like Todd McLelland. I've known him since he was 17, and I like him as a person. And I like him as a coach, and I think he made a world of difference when he got here last year to this team because I think Derek Lalonde, evidence is he's a great assistant coach, but we've seen it with the Lions for years where they would bring in these guys who were great assistant coaches, but they were just not cut out to be a head coach. And that was the impression I got of Derek Lalonde. He just didn't have that kind of gravitas or whatever it is that, players were going to follow you. And,
right.
And McLelland has that. He certainly has that. He got this team's attention from day one, and he just doesn't let things fester. When he sees an issue, he jumps on it, and he's not afraid to call guys out in public and say, we're not getting enough from this guy. He called out Dylan Larkin last year and late in the season when he was playing poorly. He's called out lots of guys, and like I say, yesterday and today, he's really gone at the veterans about how disappointed he's been in their play. Not all of them, of course, but certainly the ones that played last night, and it'll be interesting to see what they get out of the guys tonight. They're going with kind of a mixed lineup, a lot of minor leaguers, a lot of kids, but there is some veterans sprinkled in, same as they did last night. Like they played the whole Casper, DeBrincat, Kane line last night. And one guy who's been intriguing in camp is Emmitt Finnie, who's from out BC,
Yep.
Kamloops Jr., 7th-round pick, who has a real shot to make this team. He just
I think I saw him on a depth chart in the top 6. I'm like, who the hell?
Well, he's been playing with Larkin and Raymond and played really well with them. He's got speed, and they need, those are two pretty fast guys, so they need a guy. Like you couldn't play Soderblom with them because he's just not fast enough in the pace.
Keep up.
Yeah. And that's like they're talking about Van Riemsdyk there. And even if he had a full camp, you wonder if at his age he'd be able to keep up on a regular basis with those guys. I could see spotting him in there because, he does go to the net front and he gets a lot of those garbage goals that, win you games. But the fact that he hasn't had a second of camp, you just wonder, is he even going to be ready for opening night?
Right.
Like, they said he'd be here tomorrow, but they didn't say he was going to be on the ice tomorrow.
Right.
So, you've got 2 more exhibition games before the real ones start, and basically 1 more week before it gets real. So I don't know, can a 35-year-old player be ready in a week?
Right. And speaking of the start, you might know a lot of where this team is headed pretty early on because they have, if you believe in home cooking at Little Caesars, they have the opportunity because they open at home with a couple. They play 5 out of 6, I believe, and 6 out of 9 on home ice in the month of October. So if they're not taking care of business when the calendar changes to November, it might be an early sign.
And the other thing about their release schedule, last year it was weird. They didn't play any divisional games till almost December. And this year, I think they've got either 7 of their first 9 or 9 of their first 11 are in the division. So if you don't start out well, you could dig yourself a hole real fast in terms of having to make up ground against the teams you'll be chasing.
Yep.
So, there's a lot of, and they are aware of that, as you say, a lot of home games. Like what's interesting about this year's schedule, because of the Olympics, the Red Wings don't play a single home game from January 30th, I think, to like March 5th.
Wow.
They're on the road leading into the Olympic break, and they go on the road coming out of the Olympic break. So they're basically going to go over a month without a home game.
Yeah, I just punched it up. I see them January 31st, and then all of February, obviously, there's 4 road games bunched around the Olympics, and then, March 4th. So 31st to March 4th. Wow, that's a long break for the fan.
Yeah.
You know what? Depending on how things going, people might appreciate the break. Not to be overly pessimistic, but again, take advantage of the home cooking when the season starts. Who knows? There's always a surprise in the NHL every year, and obviously the folks in Motown are hoping it's the Red Wings.
Well, what worrisome is, I think the one thing I would criticize Yzerman for, and you don't know if this was coming from a pay grade above him too, but I think they should have gone with the kids earlier than they did. Like he's followed the same kind of Kenny Holland pattern of letting them ripen on the vine, But you could do that when you were making the playoffs every year and you're a contender. You can't do that when you're basically trying to just get into the playoffs. Now, they've brought in a lot of guys that, would be B-list free agents. And some of them have worked out. David Perron was pretty handy when he was here.
Yeah.
Ben Schrotz played decently for them. But they've also had a lot of Vladimir Tarasenko's and, Justin Halls and the guys that just haven't moved the needle for them.
Right.
And you wonder, would they have been better served plugging a kid in there, letting them make mistakes on the job and learn? And I look at Ottawa and I look at Montreal because that's basically what they did. Yeah. They took their lumps, they played the kids, and now they've both gone past the Red Wings.
All right.
So
Yep. It's not so good.
yeah. So
I hope.
you end up in a situation where, like with Albert Johansson last year, where you'd had him for 3 years and you'd never played him. So now you had to keep him or risk losing him on waivers
Right.
without even knowing if he could play. Now it's turned out okay for them, but even Derek Lalonde never played Johansson. It wasn't until McLelland got here that Johansson started playing, and all of a sudden they realized, hey, this guy's pretty good.
Yeah. Well, that's
And so
good to know. But
yeah, but you waited 3 years to find that out. And,
right.
and they're doing the same thing. Like Wallander is going to have to go through waivers next year, so he'll be here next year. But will he be ready for the NHL? Because he hasn't played.
Well, if you know what, if it's a slow start, you might be seeing a lot of kids getting time. So
Well, I mean, you saw that last year when they brought in Casper. In November when they were not. They just didn't have. Now I'm wondering if Finnie keeps playing well, do you let him start the season on that spot with Raymond and Larkin? And if he struggles, then you bring Van Riemsdyk in after he's got his legs under him.
Yeah.
Then you've at least given the kid a shot. It's not like, you're not going to ruin the kid by letting him play the first 10 games of the year in the NHL and then sending him down.
Right.
Back, but you got to do something. Like, they have brought the kids in and given them a shot, but they just don't do it quickly. Like they waited 2 years for Simon Edmondson. They brought Carter Mazer in last year late in the season, and he immediately dislocated his elbow. I think it was in his first shift in the NHL. That was out for the season. So he's a guy that they think can be a bottom six, gritty. They've got to get harder to play against. That's the one thing about this team. They're just too soft. They've really got to get nastier, and they've got some guys like Soderblom has got the size, and he's learning to use his size to his advantage. Brand Signigaard, the Norwegian they took in the first round last year, looks like he's going to be a player. The thing I like about him is he's got an NHL release on his shot, and he never misses the net. The goalie either goes in or the goalie has to stop him. And he picks things up. I noticed in Grand Rapids, they brought him over late last season after the European season ended. And we were down there watching Grand Rapids because the Wings were done. And the first game, he looked a little lost. And the second game, he looked like he'd been in the league for 20 games. Like he just picks things up quickly. And I've noticed that in the NHL camp too. Like from one day to the next, you notice tangible improvement with him. So
good.
I asked him about that. I said, "You seem to be a quick study. Where does that come from?" He says, "Well, I've been doing it my whole life." He said, "I moved from Norway to Sweden when I was 16. I was in the men's league when I was 18." He said, "I've always had to adjust and adapt. It's kind of that old story, adapt or die." And he's been able to adapt.
Right. Smart kid.
Yeah. I know Matt Zuccarello loves him. He had him on his line at the Worlds, and he said, "I just told him, get open, kid, and I'll get you the puck." He knew the guy can finish.
Nice. Duffer, it's not all rosy, but I still appreciate the in-depth discussion because I know Wings fans in particular will be interested in hearing honest answers. And I guess we'll now
I think next year is the real year to, like this year is probably going to be another absence from the playoffs. But as you noted, next year, a lot of these veterans are done, and it'll be time for the kids. I think next year's, when you ask about Yzerman, I think next year is the year that it's either going to be put up or see ya, because next year they'll be playing all kids that he brought into the organization. And if things don't look like they're going to get better, then
he'll be in trouble.
He'll have to answer some serious questions, I would think.
If they play all the kids next year and they're getting excited and all that, maybe they'll look like what the Montreal Canadiens look like right now. They've turned a corner, and my God, the excitement in that town is off the hook. So,
the one positive I see in the guys that they have brought in that Yzerman drafted, every one of them has been a player. Right. There's nobody they've brought up who hasn't made the cut. Right. So that's a positive sign that the guys that they are bringing in, like the critics say only the first rounds, rounders make it. Well, that's not true because
No.
Soderbergh was a 5th rounder. Johansson was a 3rd rounder. Mazer was a 3rd round pick. These are 2nd, 3rd round picks are
Just
starting to.
go back to the 90s teams and look at the draft
Yeah.
picks that made up that franchise and that
Yeah.
roster, I should say. It's pretty incredible.
Yeah.
Well, for now, Duffer, go Tigers.
Yeah. They've kind of lost a little of their luster too after finishing the season 7-17.
That's all right. We'll see what happens. They're probably playing right now. But thank you for your time, and I'll check in with you later. And folks can catch your stuff, Detroit Hockey Now, right?
Yep.
And social media,
Ask the Duffer.
same as it. Okay. Ask the Duffer on Twitter/X. Thanks, Duffer. Always a pleasure. Go get them Tigers. Go get them Red Wings.
All right. We'll see ya.